Okay, here we go. Kinesiology 230, Chapter 1, Presentation number 9, Bones. Let's go ahead and jump in and get this done. So the book notes that the human body has 206 bones. Some people might have conditions where they might be missing a bone per se, or might have an extra bone, but in general, just classify it as 206 bones in the human body. And these are categorized broadly into two main functional areas, one of which is the axial skeleton and the other is the appendicular skeleton. And the axial skeleton is the skull, the vertebrae, the sternum, and the ribs. These are the bones that provide, kind of protection to the organs, the heart, the lungs, the brain, And then you also have the appendicular side, where it's the bones of the upper and lower limbs, the appendages, if you want to think appendages and appendicular, that might be a way to think of it. So, with that, bones themselves are not just static. I mean, they're living tissue that serves multiple purposes within the human body. And you have two main things that actually happen in bones, one of which is you have osteoclasts, which break down bones, and osteoblasts, they stimulate bone growth. So like the osteoclasts, they kind of come in like a bulldozer and they kind of clean the bones and clean any kind of waste material or old growth off of the bones. And then the osteoblasts themselves stimulate new bone growth. So one cleans, osteoclast cleans, and then osteoblast builds. Blast, build, clast, clean. How about that? When you look at a bone itself and you kind of take just a singular bone, you have different surfaces, and this cortical surface is kind of hard and it's dense, and it's found on like the outer layers of like the long shafts of the femur, if you will, and the humerus. And you have this this other side, or the inside of the bone, which is like the spongy side of it, which is the cancellulus, if I can say it correctly. And it's like less dense and spongy. And it's found on the inside of the bones and the vertebrae and also the head of the femur. And it's where hematopoiesis happens. And that is the process of creating blood cells. And that happens in the bone. So when, like the book notes that like bones are just not static in nature, they're not kidding. There's a lot that goes on. They provide structure and they also allow us to articulate and move around as muscles act upon the bones, but also you have this whole other process where blood is made within the bone itself. And the concept you really have to get across is when you start talking about bones and start working on with clients is, osteoporosis is this kind of porous bone process where the bones become like almost less dense, if you want to think of it like that. Now, things can help, right? But you have some things working against you. If you're older, if you're female, and maybe you're perimenopause or postmenopausal, if you were pregnant, and not working out takes stress off of the bones, and stress responds to bones. I had one client years ago. She wasn't a client. Who am I kidding? She wanted to be a client, and she was on bed rest, and she had in vitro fertilization, and I believe it was in vitro, and she had triplets. So she sat in bed for the second 2 trimesters, and she had triplets, and she was very keen on me crushing her in workouts day one. I'm like, ma'am, your bones are osteoporotic. I mean, your bones are like Swiss cheese at this point. You've had 3 fetuses kind of leaching all the calcium out of your bones. I don't care. I want to be thin. Well, I don't know what to tell you, but I would be doing you a disservice if I started crushing you right away if we didn't ease into it over the first couple of weeks. She was adamant where she wanted to be thin and she wanted to work out. I didn't take her on as a client because I just thought it was inappropriate to do that and it would have gone from bad to worse. But you have to look at it in terms of proper nutrition and exercise can help offset osteoporosis. And there's a thing called Wolff's Law where, the bone will adapt to the stress that's placed upon it. And when you place a stressor on the human organism, no matter what it is, it will adapt to that stressor, as per general adaptation syndrome. Wolff's Law is specific to bones and how bone density will increase when you have different types of exercise introduced into the equation. Now, the book states that running is good for this, lifting and especially eccentric loading is best to stimulate bone growth. I will tell you that if you have clients who are osteoporotic and they have issues as a result of osteoporosis, that running might actually be contraindicated for them because of the compressive forces that they'll experience in the spine and some of the effects they'll feel in the hip joints plural, while they're running. So you might find different ways to actually stimulate that growth outside of running. And the book notes that lifting weights is great, and I agree. And also working on the eccentric loading side of the equation is also fantastic, to which I also agree. All right, guys, thank you so much for bearing with me during these 9 presentations on the first chapter. I promise you going forward, you won't have so much content being dumped on you on the front end. There's certainly a couple other chapters where we have to dig into like the structure and function of the lungs and the cardiovascular system, but this was pretty in depth for the first chapter. So with that, I'm signing off and moving on to my next presentation.